I play cello, so I started when I was 10 years old. My fourth grade teacher found out about a scholarship for, it was a scholarship for children from non-musical families. I don't know how they could tell whose family wasn't musical. You had to go down to audition, and I auditioned, and I was given the choice of playing cello or flute, and I chose the cello. And the scholarship was for 3 years of music lessons. And at the end of 3 years, they gave me a cello. And then I went to the high school music and arts, so I kept playing. My high school had 5 different orchestras. And near the end, I was in the senior orchestra. And then I played in college, and I have kept playing. I have a cello teacher who lives in San Francisco in Richmond. And I have one lesson every month. So I've played most of my life. You know, I really love it. It's like a friend. I moved to San Francisco 30 years ago because I fell in love with someone who lived in San Francisco. It's my first awareness of it. My feelings for women was in Girl Scout camp. The waterfront counselor was flirting with one of the senior campers. And there was 2 women they were a year ahead of me in high school who were twins, and someone said they were lesbians. So that's probably the first time I heard that there were lesbians. But, you know, the first time I actually had a feeling of what it looked like when 2 women were attracted to each other was at Girl Scout camp. In high school, I had strong, loving feelings towards women, to certain women. One of my good friends in high school. It was first a matter of coming out to myself, you know, realizing that I was drawn to women sexually and not to men. And then, you know, meeting someone I loved, who loved me, and having that relationship. When I was in that relationship with Nora, most people who were lesbian or gay were closeted. And I didn't know anybody I could really talk to about it. So when Nora went back to school and I ended the relationship, I actually got very depressed. And what happened was my hands broke out in eczema, and I went to see a dermatologist, and the dermatologist talked to me and he said, you know, I think you're depressed. And I realized I really missed Nora, but I didn't trust my own feelings, that, you know, my feelings were valid. And my first job as a social worker, I decided to do some counseling with a psychiatrist. It was very encouraged, if you do social work, to have a therapist or to, you know, have an experience of therapy. The psychiatrist I met, who was a white male, kind of, I remember how he looked, tall. Anyway, when I told him kind of a little bit about myself, he said he thought I would be cured when I was in a stable relationship with a man. And so I started dating men. I was still drawn to women. And so after dating men for a couple of years, I stopped seeing the psychiatrist, and I was living in a communal household. There were maybe 8 of us, and there was a lesbian couple in the household. They were totally comfortable with their relationship and with living in this communal household. And I began to question whether there was really something wrong with being attracted to women. Then I went to see a different therapist who was a woman and told her about my feelings for women. And she said, which really surprised me, she said, I've had such feelings myself. And that was so validating. That helped me feel more accepting of my attraction to women. By the time I had that second conversation with the therapist, things had started changing, and the time when there began to be women's bookstores and women's newspaper in Boston. I was living in Boston, and women's music concerts, and the lesbian community was much more visible. And I soon had some lesbian friends, and then it became much easier to come out. That was probably the 70s. I joined a feminist therapy collective, and several of the women there were lesbians, and I started dating women again. And yeah, there was a layers of coming out, I would say. First myself, and then to another woman, which was Nora. But given the climate at the time, I really doubted my own truth. Later on, when I had more affirmation and trusted myself more, it was very different. And then there started to be gay pride parades. And I can remember the first time I marched in a gay pride parade. That would have been probably the early 80s. It was so exhilarating, to march in the parade. And I went with a gay male friend, and there were, I would say, hundreds of people. Probably wasn't as huge as the parades are in San Francisco. But walking, down some of the streets in downtown Boston, we passed a church, the Arlington Street Church, and the bells rang as we passed by. That was really, really a great experience. Coming out for many people is complicated, and when do you tell your family, and what if your family is upset? How do you deal with that? And do you come out at work? At that time when I first came out, you could be fired from a job if you were gay or lesbian. Sometimes you couldn't get housing. There was a lot of discrimination towards people who were LGBTQIA. Yeah. For a while I lived in Berkeley, just across the bay for 9 years with this woman who became my partner. And then I moved into San Francisco Zen Center. It's a Zen Buddhist center. And I've lived here for 21 years. And I met some people at a conference who were Zen Buddhists, and they practiced at the Berkeley Zen Center. So I started going there, and also to a branch of San Francisco Zen Center that's called Green Gulch Farm. It's in Marin County, and it has a big organic farm, growing vegetables. Eventually, my interest in Zen Buddhism got to be so strong that I was meditating every morning, and then I took a class at San Francisco Zen Center, and then I enrolled in it's called a practice period, more intensive practice. And I had the thought, oh, I could live here. The San Francisco Zen Center is residential. After several years at Tassajara, I was ordained as a priest by my teacher, and she asked me to commit to 5 years of training as a priest. So I did some of those years at Tassajara, and then I moved to Green Gulch Farm to be with her, just practice closer to her. After the 5 years were over, I moved back to San Francisco Zen Center. This path, I would say, this immersion in Zen Buddhism came as a surprise to me. When I moved into San Francisco Zen Center, I had no idea what a priest was, or no aspiration to be a priest. Gradually, as I practiced more and learned more, it was something very appealing about it. So my teacher has given me permission to teach, and I meet with students and teach classes and things like that. So this has become the central focus of my life. So do you have any questions?